So, Jim, what was it like reading a life story written by someone else with quotes from so many different people who know you?
It was very interesting to know how I came across. Yeah, a lot of stuff I didn't know. A lot of things that went on in gyms I had no idea about. Like who bought my first regional franchises and yeah. I mean, obviously I don't agree with everything that was said, but all the same, it was good.
What are some of the things you don't agree with that was said in the book? And why didn't you choose to have them edited out, which you could have probably done?
Well, yeah, I think people have a viewpoint. You know, some people don't like me. Some people think I'm a bit too tough. And I think it's part of the story. I wanted it to be a real account. As I said to Catherine from the beginning, it's got to be warts and all. If it's just a hagiography, it's not really fun and it's not accurate. People have different views of me. Some people really hate me. I mean, people think that I'm ruthless and I don't care about franchisees, mostly because I'm too tough on customer service. So, and I can be very hard too if you get on the wrong side of me and try to take me on legally. I mean, I think that's part of the picture of what it is.
How many people did you actually interview for this whole
Over 100.
Over 100.
Yeah.
All willing people, or was there some?
Yeah, well, you can't force someone.
Yeah.
Obviously, there were a few people I would have enjoyed.
Yeah.
It would have been useful, for instance, to say interview some of Jim's ex-wives because they have
Right.
a bit of a different story.
Yeah.
But none of them were willing to be interviewed. But Jim's current wife was really, really gracious and also willing to kind of share some of the insights of the trickier sides of being married to Jim,
which is not all beer and Skittles, I can tell you. That comes out pretty well.
So what was it actually like to write Jim's book? And can you give us a little bit of background about who you are and what other work you've done as well?
Yeah, so writing Jim's book was an amazing challenge, and I was so grateful to have the opportunity to do it. It's not every day you get to write about someone who is so well known in Australia and who not only is so well known, the time when I was doing all of the research, not many people knew much about Jim at all. He's someone who has kept quiet in many ways from public life over the past 30 years. So not only was I writing about someone who everyone knew the brand, there was so much unknown around Jim himself. It made it very intriguing and interesting.
Well, people don't even think I exist.
Yeah,
That's the strangest thing. Is there really a Jim?
That's
Yeah.
That's the number one question we get on social. Is there actually a Jim?
Yeah, exactly. And so obviously Jim's also in many ways a very unique person. So there are some things which he has strengths that are quite brilliant and I think really set him apart, and then other things that are
very,
some
very
weaknesses. And, there were some stories sometimes that I'd interview where someone would describe an exchange or something. And it's like, Jim said that or Jim did that, or you know what I mean? There's definitely some intrigue there. It's every business has a fascinating story, and the Jim's Group is no different. The business itself is fascinating. Jim's research is fascinating, and being able to work on the project and write the book was so fantastic. And to give some background, I've been a writer for many years, and I wrote my first book when I was 13, so I got started quite young.
Wow.
But this was my first biography, so it was a real awesome challenge to get to research and interview so many different people about Jim.
I think she did pretty well, actually. I mean, for somebody so young without that experience, I reckon we wanted something like the one that Ashley Vance did on Elon Musk, which is a great biography, and I think she did something that was, I'm not saying the same level, and obviously I'm not Elon Musk as a subject, but it was the same. I think she did a fairly good job of getting the real me, even if it's warts and all.
How did the actual project come about? Was it something?
Yeah, so we met it's in the introduction of the book, but we met in September 2017. Jim was actually giving a talk at a business event, and I was curious to know more about Jim's story, and I kind of chatted with him briefly afterwards, and he gave me a copy of his book, Biohistory, which I read, and then from there we kind of had a meeting, and Jim found out about the work that I do. It's a bit of a long story, but to keep it short, Jim found out about the work that I do.
I saw her TED Talks too.
Yeah. And so I help CEOs and professionals write books, and he found out about that kind of thing, and it kind of went from there.
So have you been surprised about how much reaction it's garnered? Because I know we had Sunrise, there's been heaps of podcast requests, interview requests. It's been like a lot.
Yeah, it's been everywhere. I don't think I was surprised because the whole time that I was working on Jim's book, every single person I would talk to that I was working on this book, and I literally even mean, my boyfriend and I, we bought a house last year and we were figuring out the home insurance, and at 9 p.m. on like a Wednesday night, I called up IRCV Insurance and the operator was like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm working actually still. I'm writing this book. Oh, what's it about? Oh, it's actually about the founder of Jim's Mowing, Jim Penman. Oh my gosh, when that comes out, I'm going to read it. Every person I spoke to was fascinated. Everyone I spoke to wanted to know more and they couldn't wait for the book to come out. So I don't think I am surprised at the response it got, because Jim is such a fascinating person and so many people knew so little about him.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the story resonates? Your story resonates with so many people. Both of you maybe want to answer that one.
When you see thousands of traders wandering around the streets, I guess you say, who is this guy? And, what does he do? Yeah, I don't know. I'm surprised at the level of response. I don't think I'm very interesting. My kids certainly don't.
When I interviewed Sylvia and Esther, they were both quite shocked that I was even interviewing them. Sylvia was like, a biography, about my dad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was hilarious.
Wow. There's a big difference. People who know me well are not in the slightest bit awed by me in any way. It's always strangers that have this strange reaction.
To answer your question, I do think that a few things that are interesting about Jim's story is, one, it's a very good success story and it's a very good Australian success story. And Jim's is not just a story of some entrepreneur who did, started some app and did something. It's actually a story of so many hundreds and to thousands of Australians' lives have been changed themselves by the Jim's brand, by becoming franchisees, by becoming franchisors. It's such a prosperous model that I think that the Jim story kind of reaches a wider audience in a more powerful way because of that. And so I think the success story of the business is intriguing, but then also the unusual traits of Jim himself are intriguing. And I think the combination together make people go what? His real name isn't even Jim?
Yeah,
know what I mean? There's just so many odd...
A lot of backlash online when that came out, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, online there's a lot of backlash. So there's obviously a lot of memes and stuff that go around, and everyone was crossing out from Jim's to David and all this sort of stuff. So
there you go.
Yeah.
I think they're like the rags to riches element, don't they?
Yeah, I
the
think
fact
so.
that somebody starts with nothing and deeply in debt and with $24 and launches it. But in some ways too, it's kind of closer to people's understanding of business too.
Yes.
It's very difficult to understand. I'm listening to a book about Amazon founder, and it's kind of like someone in America, having this high tech stuff. It's hard to comprehend. But somebody goes and pushes a lawnmower because they're broke and has a useless PhD. I mean, that's something people can understand.
It's very relatable and attainable as well. Being actually inspiring for someone, as you said, they don't need to know coding or have some sort of...
Yeah. People are inspired by it. People are actually inspired by the story to actually go out and try something similar. And it's an interesting point that wealthy people these days tend to be much more like me than they are like someone like Jeff Bezos or those Elon Musk. It's people who actually do the standard jobs around the home, the service jobs that are actually typical of successful people in this country.
Yeah.
It's a massive industry.
It is. It's a huge industry. It's a great opportunity too. So it's people can relate to it. I know a lot of people have been inspired to buy franchises because of my story.
I want to touch on that about marketing, for example. Obviously, it wasn't a deliberate marketing ploy, but in terms of marketing for the brand and for yourself, it's actually been one of the best things that we've done in recent years.
Yes.
Have you been surprised about all the marketing and about how much actually interest in the brand it's generated from this exercise?
Yeah. I'm pleasantly surprised. But, we've even had comments in the franchisee survey, which we send to our franchisees every year, saying how much leads have increased since the book came out.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, it was a nice comment I was just reading the other day.
Yeah. So what in the book that was when you read it on reflection, you said before there was things you learned out of it, obviously about region stuff. What was one of the main surprising things that you learned when you're reading about that you didn't know happened in the company or went on?
Well,
I know one of them.
Like I said, it's things like about the stuff that people did in the early days, like who owned the first regions. I had no idea. I thought Phil Moore bought Adelaide, but it actually wasn't. It was him and somebody else, and then somebody else bought Queensland, and they just laughed about it. They had I didn't have a clue what was going on half the time. I'm often amazed I'm successful in the business at all. I'm really clueless in so many ways. Done so many stupid things, but in a way, I suppose it's encouraging. If somebody as dumb as Jim can do it, then I can succeed too. I think if people have that kind of view, it's better than thinking, oh, he's so great, I couldn't be like that.
What formula could you find for Jim's success then, Catherine, when you were reading and interviewing? Was there a common theme or some sort of common thread that you could sort of see that led towards his success?
I think there are, and I think that I think it is important. Obviously, Jim has a lot of weaknesses, as I shared in the book.
Yeah.
But I also do think it's important to understand that he did a few things right in a really consistent way that are very unusual. Obviously, Jim will tell you about customer service and how passionate he is about that. And that's a massive one. He'll tell you about how much he looks after the franchisees as a group and as a whole and cares for them. And the franchisee success rate in the Jim's group is really, really good. And, if you were to start a business on your own or start a Jim's franchise, you have the chances of success succeeding with Jim's are so much higher. So yes, that's very true. But I also think there's a few other things Jim's done that I mentioned in the book that don't often get spoken about as much. And I think because Jim is less good or doesn't like as much dealing with people and making it relationships based, Jim built a franchise system that was actually really, really good. I think a lot of people start franchising out there, and because they have a strength with relationships, they lean on that strength, where in many ways Jim's weaknesses there forced him to build a system that is really good. And Jim thinks through incentives. So Jim isn't actually greedy. Like how much other franchisors out there will be worth compared to Jim will be worth less than them because he actually takes less of the pie. He lets his franchisees have more money. He lets his franchisors have more money to succeed. And they'll all obviously have their own say on that. But overall, when you look at other franchises, it's actually very fair, and Jim is not greedy. So that's one thing that makes it easier to prosper because, hey, it's a better deal for franchisees.
People usually grossly overestimate my wealth. The BRW wanted to interview me for their Rich 500. And I said, I'm not even close to that bunch. Come on.
Yeah. And also, Jim, through that and through being willing to give up some of that money and that income, rather than going, oh, it's all for me and all for the franchisor or the head office at the top, Jim did the incentivizing really well. So from the very beginning, Jim was like, I want this franchise agreement to be something that I'd be willing to sign. Hardly any franchisors do that. Most franchisors, if they were to be very honest, I don't think would sign their own franchise agreements. Jim wanted it to be the case. So he made sure it was fair. He made sure you could walk away. He made sure it was a flat fee. He actually just did a really good deal that was fair and decent, that I think naturally just grew over time because everyone would, someone would get into Jim's, they would do well, they would tell someone at a barbecue, they'd inquire about a Jim's franchise, and over the past 30 years, it's done so well because of the system that Jim's built.
And with that system, left that contract in the early, they were all revolutionary ideas, weren't they?
Yeah.
They were not existent anywhere, I know, in the Australian franchising marketplace. So maybe come and talk about how that process came with it. You're fighting with lawyers to try and get stuff put in or taken out in the early days.
It was just, they kept on arguing with me. I spent months arguing with lawyers.
Yeah.
They just said, you're being too nice. That was the term they used. And I said, no, I'm just going to make it something that I want to sign, that you'd be mad not to sign, something so attractive. So I looked at it always from the point of view of the person I was going to be dealing with. I couldn't sell something I didn't believe in. I just couldn't do it. I'm not a good salesman anyway, but I can't do it if it's insincere. If I think there's a problem with the system, then I want to tell people about it.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, my very poor personal relationships is helpful that way too, because I can't lie and I can't deceive people in any way. I have to absolutely believe in what I'm doing.
And by the way, there's a funny anecdote in the book just about how much Jim can't lie. One of the people that I interviewed, they shared how when they hit 10 years of being a franchisee of the Jim's Group, they got this hamper being like, congratulations, you've been in here 10 years, and a little note with Jim's mobile number. And the franchisee was like, oh, that's so cool. And he called Jim up and was like, oh, Jim, thank you for the hamper. And Jim's like, oh, I didn't send it. And someone else in the office had sent it. Even to that level, Jim was like, oh, no, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. And when I asked him about it, when I was interviewing him for the book, Jim was like, yeah, I couldn't take credit for something I didn't do. But it was his...
I might have authorised it, but I didn't do it.
So, yeah, I think the fact that Jim can't lie...
What do you think that's your biggest weakness then, Jim, that you can't lie? Because obviously you mentioned a lot, you've got a lot of weaknesses, but is that something that's come out and actually turned out to be sort of a strength almost in a way?
Well, yes, it's my biggest weakness, which is almost my biggest strength. And I have to do things in a certain way. Actually, Greg Nathan did a review.
Yeah, I saw it.
You see that?
Yeah.
Which I'd forgotten about. Apparently he was giving a talk, and I got up and said something like, well, if you don't like the talk, I'm walking out, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But Greg Nathan's a pretty famous sort of guy. But I just do stuff like
Greg
that.
Nathan's very big in franchising in Australia.
I often cringe when I look at the stuff that I've done in the past. I probably do worse things.
In Greg Nathan's review as well, he also mentioned another anecdote where he once was at some conference and they were like, all right, here's Jim to open the conference. And then Jim got on stage and was like, the conference is now open. And got off stage.
It was our conference.
Was it your conference?
There's something
that's
you've
a
been
funny story.
Is there something you've ever tried to work on? Is the social side? I know you obviously acknowledge you're lacking it, but is something you try and work on?
I try to. I'm probably slightly less abysmal than I used to be.
And I think I think if you use the franchisor dinner is a very good example of Jim really trying. And when I interviewed Jim about that afterwards, because I was quite shocked to see this very personable side of Jim, and he was telling jokes and the jokes were flying around and everyone was laughing. And I asked Jim later and Jim was like, oh, it was all an act. Like it's all just, I've learned it. But you do a good job. Like it comes across as quite natural.
I'm a very extreme introvert. I actually got to my farm and I can be there for 24 hours quite happily just by myself, just gardening and listening to talking books and reading and stuff.
But people never know that from your public speaking though, because obviously you're so conditioned at doing it, but you do a talk at training, which is the franchisee ethos and all that sort of stuff. And for some reason, from what I've known working with you, in large groups you're fantastic, which is why you're so good at the dinner and that thing. Yeah. But sometimes it's those little things, which...
It's a small group.
It's a small group, yeah. So since the release of the book, though, when you read it, has your views or opinions on anything that was in the book changed since the release of the book, which wasn't too long ago?
No, the book's not wrong in any way. We've changed a lot since then. There's a whole stack of things going on right now which are amazingly exciting that weren't there. Better programs for franchisees and franchisors and just new ventures and things like that. I mean, Jim's changes so rapidly that in 6 months' time, everything's out of date. Yeah. But the principles are right.
Yeah.
I haven't changed.
Well, the story isn't out of date. There's just more story to add.
Yes.
Well, there's one thing I want to expound was the Jim's University chapter. And maybe you can tell people a bit more. Was that something that was surprising you about how much of research in the Jim's University and all sort of stuff that Jim puts his money into?
Yeah. Well, before I even started writing the biography at all, before that was even a discussion, that's what I was interested in. I was like, oh, wow, you're doing all this research. Like, that sounds really fascinating. And I was really interested to know more. And then obviously hearing about the university, I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. This is, an institution people can go to learn such a different way to what other unis are providing. Yeah. I think it's really awesome.
Do you want me to tell us a bit about where your research is at now? And what's been happening with it? Any updates?
Well, I'm actually looking for a research head. Right now we're advertising for somebody kind of a professorial type level to drive the whole thing properly. And now that ISN's not losing money, hopefully it'll make money next year. We can actually use the profits from that to also expand the research venture. Yeah. So it's useful having your own institution, but my basic interest is always just in the research. I think it's got incredible potential to, especially for things like mental illness and drug addiction and so forth. There's a come out of my PhD work, which is basically originally in history, but the implications that you can change character for the better are extraordinary. We've got some really good stuff going with rats. Like we're able to make rats much better mothers, for example, much better mothers just by using pheromones and also more hardworking in rat terms, which means more exploratory. So I think it could be very, very big, and that's my biggest passion. I mean, I love gyms, and I'll never leave it. But at the same time, my life is about my research more than anything else.
So what story did you find the most fascinating? Because obviously you interviewed so many people. Was there one that really resonates with you or that stuck out in your mind?
Oh, gosh, that's really tough. Yeah. One story that really stuck out.
You can give us a couple if you want.
About like someone associated to Jim or about Jim?
About Jim. Like, was there something that you found really stood out?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot really, really stood out. I think some of the small talk, social awkwardness has stood out. And sometimes I would even feel that, so like I think I said in the book even like one time, we finished an interview and then Jim kind of left without saying goodbye. And, it's such a little thing. And what even are these social little norms anyway? What do they really mean? But obviously, as someone who's social, I was used to that kind of thing. Not that I minded at all, like it's fine. But
bear in mind that I'm about 100 times more social than I used to be. So.
Yeah, well, it was interesting hearing some stories from the early days.
Yeah.
and hearing and even interviewing, for instance, your daughter Sarah, and her explaining coming over to your house, and that you now, when she comes in, you offer her a cup of tea. And for her, that was quite revolutionary to have her dad offer her a cup of tea. She was like, oh my gosh, what? Like, you just like were hospitably offering me a cup of tea. You know what I mean? She saw that growth and change in her dad. But I think some stories that really stand out, which we've kind of already touched on, is how ridiculously consistent Jim can be at something. So for instance, I know that exercising is a really good idea. I know that I should do it. Do I do it? Jim reads an article, 30 minutes of exercise every day. That's the best thing for health. So what does he do? Every single day he does 30 minutes of exercise, whether it's a 5K jog on his treadmill, a swim, or he works on his farm for a few hours. Like that's ridiculous. Like, I don't have that discipline, and I wish I did. Like, that's amazing that you can read something, go, okay, this is good for me, this will make me better. And there's also a big backstory to that of when you fell out of exercise when you were young, and the business kind of ran into the ground, and you got debt because you weren't exercising. And Jim realized that he needed exercise to overcome his laziness, and he's so committed to it, and he's so consistent with it. And I think that's quite a rare story, because I think consistency is actually, quite rare, and that takes a lot of discipline. So that stood out to me as a quality in Jim.
At the same time, I can be incredibly lazy and idle about certain things. Like this factory that I was running, which was losing money for years. And my wife, who knows nothing about factories, steps in, and within 2 months it's profitable because she learns how to do it. She gets in and does the groundwork. So yes, I'm disciplined in some ways, incredibly lazy in others.
There you go.
Was there anything inconsistent you found out between the interview subjects and actually dealing with Jim yourself? Was there any inconsistencies?
Yeah. There were some stories that I don't know what actually happened.
Yeah.
And I share that in the book. So I say, here is this person's account and here is this person's account, but I actually can't find a middle ground here. Yeah. I think since then I've actually, it was actually really hard sometimes to figure out what actually happened, exceptionally hard, because you have a perception of who Jim is, I have a perception of who Jim is, Jim has a perception of who Jim is, and then you interview 100 other people of their own perceptions. And then when you talk about an event that happened between Jim and another person, and they both remember it differently. Yeah. And it's very odd and I've learned how bad actually human memory is, and how we're not actually very good at remembering facts. So sometimes I would get two stories and there's no way either could be right because there was no middle ground, but I would just have to share both people's memories of the circumstances. And I think that what it actually comes down to is that someone might be hurt by something, and I could understand why they were hurt by whatever that Jim did. I can totally understand that. And because of that hurt, they might remember and focus on over the next 5 years where that hurt comes from. And then Jim will have his own reasons for maybe remembering different aspects of the story. So I think when you read the two parts and accounts next to each other, you think, okay, I get a bit of an idea where both are coming from. But yeah, it's quite surprising how sometimes, I mean, a lot of the time the middle ground is found and you can find out what actually happened, but sometimes it's so emotionally charged that people just remember things differently. Yeah.
I want to maybe touch on with the people who you interviewed. So can you maybe tell people, who did you actually interview? Maybe, was it franchisees, franchisors, staff? Okay, so I interviewed friends, family, franchisees, franchisors, staff, ex-franchisees, ex-franchisors, ex-staff members. And people Jim also went to school with. Right. So it was quite a mix. So it was, quite a mix. From people who love him and hate him. Now, did you give that list to Jim before to sort of go over, or did Jim gave you free total permission to actually interview whoever you want?
Jim said, if you do this, giving you this opportunity, I want it to be warts and all. Right. And that was the only reason why I was interested in the project, because if it was to not be a warts and all, then what even is it? It's just a farce and a fake. Yeah. I don't know, story spin. I'm not interested in that. So when he said, I want it to be warts and all, and in fact and he gave me contact details of some people who really didn't like him.
I tried to think of everybody who would have negative
things to say. And that was what really got me interested in the project, because it was very rare, I think, to come across someone who will give you contact details of someone who hates them and to say, here, go interview them and find out their story. Yeah. And I was really excited about that, because I think it's really important to hear both sides of the story.
Possibly it's fortunate a lot of them didn't want to talk to you.
Some of them, unfortunately.
got more negatives than that.
Some of them didn't want to talk to me. Right. And I could understand that as well.
There was one guy who actually did the interview and then asked for the stuff to be taken out.
Yeah, there was actually some really good negative quotes, and
you couldn't use them.
I couldn't. Well, there was this one really good quote, and I obviously won't use the quote.
Yeah.
But it was just a really good. The quote was a really good example of sometimes Jim's exceptional lack of empathy when replying to an email.
Right.
And there was actually a little snippet from an email this person had sent Jim and Jim's reply, which just kind of illustrated how sometimes Jim can be way too quick at replying to emails, and emotionally it was just a bit harsh.
Yeah.
And it was such a good example of that, and I really wanted to show that side of Jim's character, but he asked for everything to be redacted.
Yeah. Upon reading the book, Jim, when you had a read for it, was there anything, like, obviously there's people want to change things, but was there anything in particular that stood out to you that if you could do again that you would have changed upon reflection?
Well, in my life or in the book?
From the book, in your journey, when you read that chapter or when you read a little paragraph in there and you thought, oh, why did I do that? Was there anything that really stood out to you?
There's so many things in my business story, so many mistakes. I mean, there's any number of things that I've done wrong. If I could take what I know now and go back to my 30-year-old self, I reckon I'd be a billionaire by now, quite frankly, because I've just done so many stupid things. You know, trusting the wrong people, just dumb mistakes and things that I didn't have a clue about. So, you know, my whole life. The only thing is that I'll never regret my children. So I wouldn't change anything that goes back more than 9 years ago when my youngest son was conceived, because if I had, I'd miss out on my kids.
Yeah.
But from a purely business point of view, there's so many, and that's, I don't know. I think that's important. People who don't recognise their mistakes are condemned to repeat them. So it's important to know what you've done wrong in the past and to face up to that, and not try to think that you. I find one of the most damaging things in business is that people won't admit that they're in the wrong in any way, or they've done anything wrong, or that they're doing anything wrong, and they just keep on. They won't learn. We call them leads in franchising terms. People who just will not recognise, hey, I made a mistake. I should have treated that client differently. They say, no, it's the client's fault. It's the system's fault, and you can't help them. Whereas I think the ability to look at yourself and say, hey, I've done stupid things, and not be too bad about it. But I think being a Christian helps with that too, because, you know, we're taught to be humble. You know, if we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But if we confess our sins to God, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So that basic Christian teaching of humility, I think, is a very, very important one. And it's very underestimated in terms of business.
Yeah, how's that changed your business ethos with your Christianity?
My business ethos is totally controlled by my Christian beliefs, in a sense. The whole notion that you have to look after the person you're dealing with and think of their point of view. I mean, I do bad things and I hurt people, but not deliberately. I don't deliberately go out and cheat somebody. Some people would say I've acted in a very hard fashion, and you know, I can be very hard, especially if you get on the wrong side of me, if you try and take me on. But at the same time, I really do care about my franchisees. I really want them to be successful, and I find the most glorious happiness to come out of gyms is hearing stories of franchisees and franchisors who have been successful. And the deepest hurt is when they fail. It's just a deep-rooted emotional driver for me. And I don't think of it in dollars and cents. I think of it in terms of somebody being successful or not. And what could I have done different? And whenever anybody fails, I always look at myself and say, what could I have done different? How could I change things? How could I prevent this from happening?
So touching on this moving forward, one of the questions was, where do you hope to see gyms in the next 5, 10, 15 years? Do you have like a long-term plan? Or what's next for Jim's Group moving forward?
Well, our complaint rate has gone down from like 100% in pre-franchise days to 5% when we started franchising, to 2% to 1.5% to 1%. Now it's about 0.75%. I reckon we can at least halve that. I just want to see better and better and better service to my franchisees, and better service to my customers. And that's my overwhelming aim. The numbers have always been secondary. I think if you look after the service first, treat people really, really well, eventually it will pay off. So, and we have an incredibly exciting projects going right now in terms of like software development in particular, and new staff members. We've got a staff member just employed to ring up our franchisees who are having problems with customer service and counsel them. somebody with 12 years in the call centre, just to try and help people to do better, because poor customer service is very hurtful. It hurts people's businesses. They lose money, and they often fail because they don't look after customers. Yeah, new software that'll help people, like remind them if you haven't called the client back, beep, 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 come on, call that client back. And remind them to do the right thing. And you need to send that quote through, and here's a text to follow up to make sure the client gets it. And then we'd like to be able to know if a franchisee doesn't return a phone call, for example, or doesn't call a client back. We'd like to be able to know that they're not doing that, and then ring them up and say, hey, what's happened here? Why did that happen? Immediately. If I can help people to do things better, gyms will be successful. But you've got to look at the service first.
It's fairly interesting how you don't define success by, let's say, like 10,000 franchisees or whatever. You're saying these two sort of different metrics. If you take care of them, that will indirectly look after that. But ultimately, your main goal is better customer service, better support to franchisees. So what about you, Catherine? What do you think objectively, looking from as a neutral party, where would you see gyms in 10, 5 years? What can you predict?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I know that something that I found, I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer that question, but not being involved in the business, more being involved in understanding Jim's life story. But I will say that one of the things I found fascinating in interviewing Jim was his talk of, like, Jim does think quite long term, and he's thinking of, well, hang on, who are my competitors? Are they actually, for instance, Airtasker and other things like that? And so what can I do with gyms to ensure I can keep providing great quality leads to all the gyms guys? And I think, I don't know where gyms will be, but I think that with a long-term vision and a care for customer service and franchisees, I'm sure it's only going to grow.
Yeah. Maybe you want to touch on that a bit, Jim, about that. What Catherine said was a good point about Airtasker and those digital players, and what your views are on how you can counteract that as a company moving forward.
Well, we're up against companies that have like hundreds of times our resources. These are multi-billion-dollar companies, and you know, if you weren't nervous about it, you'd be foolish. I do think we can succeed, but the one advantage we've got, we haven't got the money these people have got, the marketing skills and all the rest of it. But if we focus on service, in the end, people are going to want to go where they get great service, and I think that's going to be our major focus. I don't think we can try and be like them. I think we've got to be better in terms of the experience of the customer.
But they also don't have a gym as well. Whereas the difference is with those digital ones, they're just big corporate entities. Whereas with gyms, it's always been, obviously, with more recent people getting to know you, actually becoming know the brand, which is what this book has done, help humanise what other be a brand.
It's just an advantage. As long as I'm alive, and I expect to be around for the next 20 years at least, and running the business, I might say.
You've got no plans for retirement, do you?
Not ever. I think it's something we should make use of, that's for sure.
Yeah. So is there anything you want to leave us with, Catherine, in regards to what projects you're working on next, or where people can find more about you or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. So probably the best place to find me is my website, but my surname is very painful. I don't know.
We'll put it on the screen.
If you want to put it on the screen or something. But it's my first name dot my surname.
And they can get the book from there as well, can't they?
Yeah, they can. So it's catherinemoolenschot.com.au. If you want to find out any more about me.
Even I have trouble spelling that. I have to look it up.
It's Dutch. It's 11 letters. It's painful.
You couldn't be Smith or anything, could you?
No. But I wouldn't have got the domain name if I'd been Smith. It would have been taken already. See, some benefits. Yeah, no. So I'm working on some really cool, interesting projects moving forward, and if people want to find me, I think the website's probably the best place. I do some ghostwriting and mentor CEOs and professionals to write their own books as well. I've also just last week launched my latest novel called I Am Megan, which was super exciting. I launched that in the CBD. And I've just started writing another novel in my small amount of spare time. Wow. So, yeah.
So if anyone wants to find out more, hopefully they go there and check you out. And obviously on YouTube, if they Google, you put in YouTube your name, the TED Talks will come up as well. Yep. So maybe I just want to touch on something real quickly before we end, was about your next project. I want to go back to it again regarding franchising, which is something Jim's obviously very passionate about. So can you just tell us a bit more about this sort of project you've got on the go, Jim, with Catherine's assistance going?
I am very shocked by the way franchisees are treated in so many companies. It's just awful. It's everything they hate. It's people being pushed around and bullied and forced into bankruptcy and treated like they're dirt. And it just makes me very angry. And the franchising code does so little to protect them. It's useless. It's all about getting a lawyer to have a look at your contract. And the contract's got nothing to do with how good the company is. And I know that because even within gyms we have the same contract, but some franchisors are a lot better than others. Most of them are pretty good, but all the same. And I think what should be happening is that the law should actually oblige people to do, contractors to do what we do essentially at gyms. I think people should be allowed to go independent, for example. I think franchisees ought to be protected against arbitrary changes in rent. I think they should be able to veto changes to their manuals like our guys can do. I mean, so many protections that are in gyms. And I know the franchisors are going to say this is hopelessly uncommercial, but hey, we're the biggest franchise chain in the Southern Hemisphere. We've been doing these things for decades. It doesn't hurt. In fact, it helps. Why can't ethical treatment of franchisees and giving franchisees power and rights, why can't they be good for franchising? Because I don't think what people are doing with Retail Food Group and the rest is even good for them. It may be in the short term, yes, they're screwing huge profits, but in the end, who's going to want to buy a franchise when somebody who treats you like dirt? In the long term, treating people decently is good business. And I think the franchising community's got to get over it. And I'm not saying that everybody's bad. I know there's great franchise systems out there. We want to name them and want to show people why they're successful. People like McDonald's, for example, I think they're very good franchising model. They don't have any forcing people to buy from them, their supplies from them, these kinds of things. And they do actually have control over what they do to some extent. They give the franchisees decent control. But I think basically, I have a passion for it. I really feel, I hear some awful stories, and Catherine is getting more. I've been
interviewing different franchisees from different groups and hearing horrible stories, like horrendous, like lives ruined. You know, one woman, she's at a stage in her life where I'm actually not 100% sure of her age, but I'm guessing she's 10 to 15 years away from what would typically be retirement. She now has to work for the next 30 years paying off a debt from a failed franchise. Really? So for the next 30 years of her life, she has to work full time and never take 1 cent of it home. It's like, it's not a prison sentence, but it's close. You know what I mean? And that's almost worse than bankruptcy, because she's got to do that for the next 30 years. And I mean, it's a very complicated situation of why that's come about. But I've dealt with people who've lost homes. You know, they had a business that might have been worth 500,000 to even a couple of million, and the franchisors have either changed or there's so many different issues, and it's very complicated. But for all these different reasons, it's just horrific that it's been brought to absolutely nothing, to a ridiculous amount of debt. They were meant to be moving into retirement quite comfortably, and now they've just got nothing left. They're selling their houses. Like, it's just, and these are hardworking Australians who have really tried to do the right thing. But unfortunately, they don't have much protection or help. And the bodies that are meant to protect them have virtually no power right now. So franchising can be prosperous and amazing, but a lot needs to change in Australia to stop the horrific things.
So this project's going to be about addressing that. So obviously having these stories, then obviously Jim with your obviously expert, trying to how we can fix this and how we can improve things.
Look, every time they've had an inquiry, I've gone along and told them the kind of things they need to do, and they just say yes, 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 and ignore me. And go on with all the bureaucratic, legalistic stuff, which has absolutely nothing to do. There's only one thing about the franchising code that has any meaning, and that is the requirement to give a list of current franchisees with contact numbers. And I know that isn't even applied most of the time. I've seen this, but they have the office number for every franchisee. They completely ignore it. Nobody does anything. It's just deeply shocking. You have some appalling systems that provide no protection, no support, and they keep on flogging it, and nobody stops them. There's no disclosure. They should be interviewing franchisees every year like we do, and then displaying the results to everybody. And instead, if you don't get this, you get your money back 100%. The legal system is awful. It basically, these franchisors just got so much money that they can beat the small guys. And I know that's the case too, because we're in a situation as well, and I know how easy it is to use the law to harass, and to defeat people who've got less money than you do and got less experience and all the rest of it. It's appalling what goes on, and the law ought to change things. And I know in America we're basically copying what they do, but the so-called disclosure document, for example, now this is supposed to give you information about what's in the contract. It's garbage. It's absolutely useless. My own franchising lawyer with years and years in the industry said she would struggle to understand these things. How on earth can somebody with no business experience possibly get sensible advice from some bureaucratic, legalistic travesty of a document. And yet this is what they do. They just get more and more legalistic stuff. It's a beautiful ground for lawyers and financial advisors. They make a fortune, and the franchisees get totally screwed. And I know I'm probably speaking against my own self-interest to do this book in a sense, because I'm actually going to say that if every franchise system was ethically run under proper guidelines, we probably wouldn't have such a competitive advantage as we do. But at the same time, it just gets me so angry to see the way people are treated.
Are you still seeking submissions for people's
Yes.
stories?
Oh, yes.
What's the best way they can, if someone's watching this, can actually reach out?
Probably best to just go to my website and go to the contact page.
Or you just email Jim@jims.net.
There you go.
And I will pass them on to Catherine straight away. Anything I hear about from current... We have franchisees who've been in other systems, and I just pass details straight to...
Yeah.
Is looking for like a next year maybe release, or I know it's probably hard to tell at this
Hopefully.
stage, unfortunately, but maybe next
How
year.
long did it take the first book to do? That was about a year.
So Jim's book took till from when I first started on it till it was sent to the printers about 11 months.
Okay. So you've already started underway, obviously getting...
Yes, it is early days still.
Early days still, so maybe hopefully sometime next year. But you obviously heard from Jim a bit about what it's going to be, and Catherine as well. So we'll leave it there, guys. Thank you for agreeing to do this, and I learned a bit listening to it. Actually, it was really good. So I'm looking forward to actually the next release as well. But thanks. If there's anything you want to say or no, leave us with, all good. All right, thanks, guys. All right, thanks for listening to anyone, and hope you enjoyed it.